the microbiome. The reason why we're going to be covering the microbiome is because one of the driving mechanisms of long COVID and one of the symptoms that many people have is microbiome disruption. So we're going to cover a little bit about what that is and how you can treat it. So I'm going to open my presentation. And this, we're actually going to continue this topic to next week because it's a really big topic. So there's just a lot to cover. So as many of you know, Hippocrates, who's the father of modern medicine, he said that all disease began in the gut. And he said this around 2000 years ago. And it turns out that he was actually right, because many conditions actually do begin with disruptions in the gut, in gut health. So the human gut is home to approximately 100 trillion microorganisms, and this is referred to as the gut microbiota. It harbors a gene set 150 times greater than the human genome. So these microbes aren't passive. They have a profound effect on our health. They protect against infection, they produce vitamins, they maintain healthy mucosal layer, and they also help to move food through the digestive system. So 70 or to 80% of the immune system is located in the gut. Blood sugar regulation is affected by gut health, and they also modulate the function of the brain, bones, heart, skin, eyes, and the muscle tissue. So there are many things that can actually disrupt gut health, and we're going to speak a little bit about what some of them are, so you can identify if you're someone who has long COVID and you're suffering from microbiome disruption and different gut health issues. It's a good idea to be aware of what might have left you predisposed to suffer from microbiome disruption, and what things in your life you can actually remove and address in order to heal more quickly. So processed inflammatory foods, I'm sure a lot of you probably know, refined carbohydrates and industrial seed oils. So they are, they are a risk factor in basically for gut dysbiosis. And the standard American diet is really high in these kind of foods because, as many of you know, all kinds of processed foods basically include industrial seed oil. So we're talking about canola oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil. And there are many reasons why processed foods, disrupt the microbiome. One is that they're really low in nutritional quality. So when you think about nutrition, basically the food that we eat obviously then becomes the infrastructure of our body. So if you're not feeding it with the proper nutrients, then infrastructurally you will be weakened. And one good example of this is the cell membrane. So as you can see here in the diagram below, every single one of our cells has a lipid bilayer, a lipid membrane. And when we consume poor quality fats like these industrial seed oils that I mentioned, what happens is that our cell membrane is actually becomes compromised, and that means cellular communication is compromised. Any kind of process that the cell needs to do is compromised, which means that the cell is obviously something very small and micro, and the cells make up larger systems in our body. So we don't want to be compromised on a cellular level. So things like hydrocarbons, trans fats, toxins that basically come from cooking starches at a really high temperature, those things cause inflammation in the body and disrupt the microbiome. And another thing is actually the packaging of food. So, often any kind of food that comes in a packaging, the microplastics, bisphenols, mineral oils, any of these kind of things leach into the food itself, and that also causes gut microbiome disruption. So additives, I'm sure many of you have heard of things like silicon dioxide. These kind of additives that are put basically in processed food and also some low quality supplements. Actually, you'll often see these kind of additives, anti-caking agents, flow agents, whitening agents. All of these things affect the mucosal layer, and they basically, when the mucosal layer is damaged, what happens is pathogens are able to enter what should be a sterile zone of the microbiome of the mucosal layer, and then this causes um, endotoxin accumulation and just damage to the mucosal membrane in general. So those are kind of the main mechanisms of why inflammatory food is bad for the microbiome. Fiber. So fiber is, maybe a slightly controversial topic because I think a lot of people in the paleo and keto sphere don't really get enough fiber because they're trying to eliminate all carbohydrates. But basically, fermentable fibers are fibers that we can't digest, but our microbes actually thrive on them. And when the bacteria digest these fermentable fibers, they produce short chain fatty acids, so things like butyrate. And those short chain fatty acids have many different functions in the body to help protect us from disease. And it's really necessary to feed the bacteria, so they then produce these short chain fatty acids, and then those in turn have a positive effect on our health. So here are examples of some higher fiber foods. I would just remove the pasta. I don't think that that's really a good example, but the other ones are good. And one thing to keep in mind if you're going to try to consume a lot of beans is really the phytic acid levels. So phytic acid is basically blocks mineral absorption in the intestinal tract. And phytic acid is something that was found in most beans and legumes. It's kind of an anti-nutrient, and this can be neutralized by 7 hours of soaking, in some cases more, in some cases less, and the addition of some acidic neutralizer like lemon juice or like apple cider vinegar. And this really helps to make the beans more digestible. So here in this graph, you can see basically the different types of beans and how long they should be soaked for prior to eating. And this is really important if you want to optimize the bioavailability of the food without blocking the mineral absorption. And all ancient cultures and traditions would have actually had a practice of soaking and sprouting their grains. It's really more of a modern day thing that people would just cook them immediately in a pressure cooker or something like that. So another way to be inspired by this is looking back on ancient tradition and seeing the different ways in which other cultures prepared their beans. So stress, I think everyone knows that it affects the microbiome in many ways. So here, the two nervous system states, you can see in the parasympathetic state, which is the relaxed state, stomach acid activity is increased. And in the sympathetic state on the right, stomach activity, enzymes, acid, all the different things is inhibited. Because of course, if we're needing to fight or run away, our body wants to allocate resources to the limbs in order to run away. It's not the time to be eating and digesting food. So energy and resources flow away from the stomach. And of course, if you're in this kind of state on a daily basis, at work, on the highway, because you have a stressful home environment, then your body's confused and it doesn't understand why you're in this state all the time, but it's still going to not allow you to digest properly and release the enzymes that you need. So stress also alters the intestinal mucosal permeability and cytokine secretion, the community structure, and the activity of the microbiome. So serotonin, epinephrine, dopamine are neurotransmitters that we usually think of in regards to brain health. But they actually also regulate gut motility, nutrient absorption, the GI's innate immune system, and the microbiome. And basically, stress-mediated changes change the microbiome colonization patterns of uh, the gut microbiome. So, although we think of these neurotransmitters just relating to mood and cognition, they actually also really affect gut health. And it's kind of a catch 22 because stress um, will change the microbiome. And then when the microbiome changes, that then will affect our nervous system function and our HPA axis function. So, all in all, stress is definitely really bad for microbiome health. And it's something that we, try to really get under control in the case of long COVID, because as we know, both microbiome disruption and nervous system dysregulation are driving mechanisms of long COVID. So we need to get both of those under control if we're going to heal. So I think I'll cover one more. So chronic infections, bacteria, fungal, viral pathogens, they alter the composition of the gut. And this can even be, very underlying. Some people have candida for years and years and years, and it might just manifest as some brain fog, a bit of fatigue. Um, and it won't be super prevalent, but it still means that it's doing some damage in your body. Um, so a GI stool map is a really good way to test to see what is going on in terms of that in happening in your gut. But one really common bacteria that people have is H. pylori, which is this one here. I would say so. It's a gram-negative bacteria that around 30 to 40% of people have, and it's linked to many different gastric disorders. It affects host immune response, antimicrobial peptides, and the immune system. So this is something that we really want to avoid overgrowing. Although this and the same with candida, small amounts of these bacteria are perfectly fine and harmful. It's not the idea, and this is kind of the issue with this Western medicine approach to these kind of microbial imbalances, is just to wipe out entire colonies, and that's not really the approach that we want, because it will bring you back to a baseline, but then it will leave you as, if not more, susceptible to reinfection, because the problem in the first place was an imbalance of the bacteria. So we want to feed our gut with more and more and more healthy bacteria, so those outnumber and out colonize the bad ones. We don't want to just eradicate everything. So candida, as I'm sure many of you have know, so some candida is harmless. And it's only when candida takes on the hyphal form that it becomes an issue. And this hyphal form of candida is responsible for infecting the mucosal layer of the gut, damaging the cells that make up the gut wall. It can lead to leaky gut and many of the other diseases that we associate with leaky gut, especially immune issues. And we can really address candida with as I said, with recolonizing the gut with healthy bacteria. So especially bifidobacteria, um, it's especially good for candida because it secretes antimicrobial peptides. It also decreases the pH of the gut to make it less hospitable for pathogens like candida. So if you have candida affection, making sure that your probiotic blend has bifido in it, not just lactobacillus. Or you can supplement directly with bifido and feed your gut microbiome, as we talked about with the fiber. If you feed the microbiome, then it produces butyrate, these short chain fatty acids, which in turn also really help to regulate candida. So I'm going to open the questions and see if there's anything that people have asked. So what are suggestions for a gut healthy breakfast? Um, so, so one thing is not having coffee on an empty stomach, because this is really acidic and harsh on the stomach. So if you're going to drink coffee, have it after breakfast. Having something high protein and fat, something like eggs, avocado, omelet. If you're going to have something like oatmeal, it's not the most optimal, but it's still fine. But what the best type of oatmeal to have would be something like the oat groats, which are basically the type of oat before they become flattened and before they become steamed, or rolled oats. So rolled oats or optimally oat groats, and you soak them overnight to release this phytic acid that we talked about, which blocks minerals. And then cooking the oatmeal, sometimes you can even add an egg to oatmeal to increase, if you're cooking it, to increase protein. And then adding things like low glycemic fruits, yogurt, if you can tolerate dairy, adding yogurt and kefir, which are really probiotic. This would be another good example of gut healthy breakfast. So have you heard about E. coli 157? I watched this on Netflix titled Poisoned, where a lot of kids died because of undercooked hamburgers. Does this mean hamburgers are not healthy? So I haven't actually seen this documentary. I will check it out. But so the thing to know about hamburger meat that's different to steak is that you can't really have hamburgers rare. Um, and the reason is because, and you might be wondering, okay, why can I have a steak rare but I can't have a hamburger rare? And the reason is because for bacteria to grow, so for bacteria like E. coli to grow, there needs to be a certain environment. There needs to be warmth. There needs to be obviously the hamburger flesh, and there also needs to be oxygen. So when we cook a steak, we cook the outsides, right? We sear it, so everything on the outside that's in contact with oxygen will be in effect sterilized by that heat, and then the inside part is rare, and that is not going to have any bacteria on it because it was never exposed to oxygen, right? It was inside the meat. The difference with hamburger meat is that it's ground beef. So basically, it's tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of meat where oxygen is exposed on every side of the meat, and then it's made into a hamburger, right? So even when you cook the outside of it, there is still inside the hamburger are still little pieces of meat that were previously exposed to oxygen, and that's where the E. coli can grow, and it can be really bad. So unless you, for example, buy a steak, you have your own meat grinder at home, everything is really sterile, and you grind it, and then you immediately make the burger and cook it and eat it, then that can be fine and that can be fresh. But if you're just, it's a meat grinder that's not dirty, you're not sure about the sanitization of the butcher where you buy it from, it's really easy for bacteria to grow, and that can be quite dangerous. So this is why we shouldn't eat hamburgers rare. Can the gut biome affect pancreatic enzyme output? Um, I would say probably yes, but I would have to research more about the direct correlation between the microbiome and pancreatic enzymes, because, as I said, there are some microbes that have very specific functions and very specific effects. So we talked about the Candida one, Bifido in particular, because of the peptides it releases and because it reduces the pH of the mucosal lining. It's especially good at warding off Candida. In terms of pancreatic enzymes, I will have to research that more as to what the relationship between those are. But if your question came, um, if it came through Facebook, I can follow up there. Someone asked about goat milk. I think goat milk colostrum took away my bloating. Yes, that would make a lot of sense. You know, probiotics are great, but the best thing is actually consuming probiotic food because goat, any kind of dairy or fermented dairy has probiotics. So I assume the goat colostrum that you had a lot of probiotics in, especially if it was raw colostrum. And same with sauerkraut and fermented food. And the kind of ferments that appear in nature are always much more biodiverse than a probiotic that we buy as a supplement. It's just unparalleled, really. So if you really want to get the most diversity that you can, just try to consume fermented food. So if your bloating was a result of a lack of probiotics, it would make sense that the goat colostrum really helped with that. Castor oil, what can you say about castor oil to clean the gut? So I think castor oil can be good, but um, I mean, it's one of those things that seems quite trendy in certain alternative health spheres. And I don't think that the science and the research is super rigorous or, you know, is just very, I would say, comprehensive on the subject, but I would say castor oil is better to use as things like a castor oil pack over the liver. So things like liver detox. Some people use it, for period pains also, and you're just applying it as a pack externally on the body, not actually ingesting it. And anecdotally, and in a lot of alternative health communities, I hear that people have success with that. So that's a good way to try to use castor oil. Is juicing good? I worry about the bacteria from the vegetables and fruits. So I'm not sure if you're speaking about bacteria as in how they were grown or how they were cleaned, or if you're referring to just general bacteria in fruits and vegetables, because, I mean, fruit and vegetable, usually it's not, they can give people food poisoning easily, but this is usually because of the water that they're washed in, and it's also usually through cross contamination in kitchens. So because fruits and vegetables are usually like salads, for example, and fruit are usually eaten raw, there's a lot of chance for cross contamination in the kitchen from cutting boards, from people's hands, and that's why people get sick more commonly from raw things from a kitchen. But if you buy your fruit and vegetables from the farmers market, and especially if they're organic and they don't have pesticides, and you just wash them with water at home, there's no reason why they should be infected with bacteria. But in terms of juicing for gut health, I would say that the only time that I recommend juicing for people is when they have really, really severe gut health issues. So some people's gut, although we talked about fiber and how fiber is really great, there are some people whose guts are so disrupted and so weak and so unresilient that a fiber will really distress the gut and make it inflamed. And this is why people say, who have really terrible gut health issues, will say, oh, I can't eat fruits, I can't eat dried fruits, I can't eat vegetables, they make me so bloated. If you're one of those people, then juicing is a good solution, because you're basically getting a concentrated nutrients from vegetables and from fruit without the fiber. You're removing the fiber, and that can be really healing, because it's just a way to get an injection of nutrients without the thing that's actually inflaming you. So juicing is good for that, and as long as you don't add too many sugary or high glycemic fruits, because of course once the fiber is removed from the fruit and vegetable, that's when it becomes high glycemic, because your body doesn't have to do that work of breaking down the sugar from the matrix of the fiber. It's just immediate sugar that's just there for your body to be absorbed, and that can be super high glycemic. So just focusing on vegetables if you're going to do juicing. And that's not to say that, you know, okay, well, if you say to yourself, okay, well, I'm not one of those people who has terrible gut health issues, I can eat fiber without getting really bloated, I don't need to juice. You can still get benefits from juicing by having lots of vegetable juice, that you're able to access the nutrients of those vegetables. But in terms of a therapeutic use, I really only recommend it for people with really um, disrupted gut health issues. Okay, I think this is it. That's it. Yeah, so the only question I'm going to follow up on is about um, pancreatic enzymes, because there's also some specific botanicals that can help with that, and I need to look up what they are. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And yeah, next week we're actually going to talk about, it's going to be a continuation of the subject, and we're going to talk about the GI stool map, which is a gut health test that you can do to determine the levels of bacteria and pathogens and how to kind of correct imbalances. So if anyone's been curious about doing a GI stool map, it would be good to tune into that. Okay, thank you very much and see you next week.